And good evening, LBE family, supporters, colleagues, assistants, what else? Co-conspirators, all
Accomplices.
of you. And so I'm so excited that we are back after a long period of silence. We're back for another season. And I think I would just like to say that please do not take the silence for inactivity. The LBE, there's my buddy. The LBE has been doing a lot in the community and off screen and but we decided it was time to come back to our very first love. But it is always an honor and a privilege to be out in the community and, just in the mix of it and to hear and experience what our beloved community is feeling. And so, good evening, baby queen. I bow to you. Happy Black History Month. Today, also the very first day of Ramadan. So we have so much to be grateful for. What say you?
Yes, definitely. This is a wonderful season for us to be in, I think, as we are exploring not only Black History Month, honoring the season of Ramadan for many in our community, recognizing just recently the birthday of Frederick Douglass. Sadly, having to honor the passing of Jesse Jackson earlier this week, but there's just so many things for us to reflect on right now. And I think one of the things that I think is so important about what LBE has been doing is because we haven't been completely silent, just not necessarily in this platform, but I think of the Freedom School that was brought to our Flagstaff community, the only freedom school in Northern Arizona. I don't know if there are other freedom schools in the state of Arizona, but we are certainly bringing the message of Black history in new and unique ways to both Northern Arizona, across the state, and other places across the country. So it's just very exciting, the season that we're in, and I look forward to some serious conversation tonight about how our current history is echoing our past.
Yes. Yes. Um, it's strange. Um, I do not like to use the word believe. We don't have to believe anything. We know it. We see it. We are experiencing it. We are living it. And so therefore it moves beyond belief, um, because we have the facts and I am excited about this evening to talk about how the facts um, are resembling our past, which is it's sad at the
Mhm.
same time, and it's also very shocking. Um, and when we talk about morality, which often is overlooked when it sits beside legality. And that is why I think we're sitting in sort of scary times, or at the very minimum, times where we really need to be alert and be paying attention. And this is why we come here in this space to enlighten, to inform, and to educate. And I'm very excited about our presenter this evening, who I proudly call my brother, and he has been my colleague, and he's a very wise man. And so I'm very excited. And he's also one of the co-founders of the Lived Black Experience Project. So we're here this evening sitting as colleagues. So if you would, please introduce our presenter, and I'll see you on the other end.
All right. Thank you very much. Yes, it is my honor to reintroduce you all to one of our frequent and most treasured collaborators in this work, Dr. Ricardo Guthrie. Dr. Guthrie is a distinguished associate professor of social justice at Fisk University. He has researched and taught extensively on Afro-diasporic culture and indigenous consciousness between Blacks in the US and Africa since 1976. He is a member of the Black Speculative Arts Movement affiliated with the Museum of Science Fiction, and is a member of the Working Group on Emergent Indigenous Identities. He has published on Afro-Futurism and Indigenous Futurism, and examines racial cognition as reflected in film and media artifacts. His published works include Confederates and Colonial Commemorations in the US, Redefining the Colonial and Afro-Futurist Analysis of Wakanda and Speculative Fiction, Embodying an Imagined Other Through Rebellion, Resistance and Joy, Mardi Gras Indians and Black Indigeneity, reading Ramilda, The Semiotics of Self, Black and Navajo, Afrofuturism and the Haunting of Racial Space in Ditropia and I, Robot in Afrofuturism Volume 1. He was named an Arizona Public Humanities Scholar in 2022 and an Arizona Informant Newsmaker of the Year in 2021. In 2020, he edited a young adult book, Malcolm X, by Ebony Joy Wilkins. When he isn't writing about Afrofuturism or Afro-indigeneity, he designs public art to transform racialized spaces into projects of resilience, particularly neighborhoods recovering from Jim Crow segregation, displacement, and disenfranchisement. He is the lead artist for the historic Southside mural at the Murdoch Center here in Flagstaff, and is a collaborator on an NEH grant, Racialized Spaces on Route 66, which is training K-12 teachers to develop lesson plans countering racist historiographies of travel, movement, and social mobility. He is also the proud father of Ifa and Maya. I welcome to the stage Dr. Ricardo Guthrie.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Miss House. I appreciate you and Miss Bernadine, Reverend Bernadine, for inviting me back. Again, I read the tea leaves about you're describing the past accomplishments, and for me, it feels like there's a very definite before and after in all of those achievements, let's say, within the community. We move forward step by step, and there's a lot of things happening around Flagstaff, Dene Top, land of the Dene, that you wouldn't have imagined even 10 years ago. Well, number one, we got Kara House and other folks who are on the city council. And we've had, I think, a changeover in terms of how the community is seen. And a lot of it is due to the Live Black experience and the Southside Community Association, which we've worked with for, I don't know, decades now. So I say all that to say, just because we did that doesn't mean that it will be erased in 2026, but there's some challenges. And as we talk today, I hope you understand my purpose is not to just look back. You know, our purpose is not just to look back and say, oh, what was done to us is being done again. No, it's to say, what did we learn and how are we going to respond? Did we respond appropriately then? I say we did. Are we going to respond appropriately now? What do we do between 1850 and 2026 that will make a difference? That would be my purpose in coming on today. So let me start with a quick part discussion here, parallels between 1850 and now. I wrote an article called Renegade, historical non-compliance, preemption, and moral justice in 2010, because Arizona, as you know, had a bill, SB 1070, which was designed to stop and frisk migrants and immigrants just based on how they looked. And I think we successfully fought against the implementation of that bill. We removed the legislatures who led it, like Senator Russell Pierce. But they've come back with a vengeance. So if you ask me, Arizona has been like a test case for the nation. 2010, and now we are at 2026, and we're seeing much the same attacks that we saw 15 or 20 years ago in Arizona now being played out on a national stage. So here's the local write-up that I did on the connection between 1850 and 2010 and now 2026. It was a law designed to bridge the gap between states' rights and federal hypocrisy. It criminalized those who were running away from unjust social, political, and economic conditions, which exploited labor and belittled human life. We're talking about the enslaved people in the 1850s who would run away from slavery, seek freedom, find jobs in the North, and then they were captured and brought back because there was a law in the books that said, if you were formerly enslaved, even if you're in the land of the free, you can be brought back. Or I say deported from the North into slavery. And isn't that kind of similar to people who go to the US looking for a job and are working, but then get deported back to lands that they didn't come from? Many times, free Black people in the North were deported south. They were sold into slavery. The most famous one that you may recall was Solomon Northup, who wrote a book in 1853 or thereabouts called 12 Years a Slave. He was a free Black man, so-called, living in the North, and he was captured in Washington, D.C., sold into slavery in Louisiana. And he finally escaped after 12 years. Okay. For me, again, we can use these terms that are contested, like immigrant, migrant, or fugitive. But what's clear is that when you take someone from freedom, incarcerate them, imprison them, and make them work for you, that is a form of slavery. And so I think the parallels between now and then are pretty obvious. So I said the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was opposed by abolitionists. And abolitionists were saying we must abolish the law that enslaves another people. So in many ways, we do have abolitionists today because they're saying the law is unjust. It needs to be abolished. But Congress crafted this bill as a means of keeping the United States united. They said, well, if there's a certain group of people who should be enslaved, let's agree to do that and do it legally. But people in the North said we shouldn't be half slave and half free. And today, most Americans would recognize that slavery was wrong, right? I don't think anybody's going to say slavery was right, even if they benefited from it today, or that it was necessary for the U.S. to abolish the slave institution. Although it took a bloody civil war, over 400,000 people dead, which was about 20% of the adult population, and Reconstruction was needed to dismantle slavery. We all believe that we would have opposed slavery, right, back in the 1850s. But would we really have accepted punishment and penalties for assisting runaway slaves? In Arizona today, Americans are confronted with similar contradictions, not against escaped slaves, but against migrant laborers, fleeing unjust political, economic, and social conditions in their homelands. And we want to threaten the lives of millions of these exploited workers who come to the US for work, but then are now being deported all around the world. There's a vast difference, obviously, between slavery and the oppressive economic system that exploits today's migrants, but the workings of legal repression and racism are no less evident. And the moral imperatives, the ethical imperatives that are involved with penalizing people for being undocumented are just amazing. Of course, not only are you penalizing people, but you're rewarding others who are capturing them. We're paying for agents to capture people, good, bad, or indifferent, incarcerate them, and then deport them. So this is a moral outrage, you might say, And how do you fight for justice when people are here, quote unquote, illegally? Well, again, escaping slaves were also considered illegals, and they were considered aliens in the North. And so they could be captured and deported back south. And you could get penalized if you didn't help the slave catchers. Or on the other hand, if you did help them, you could get a reward. Okay? Today's illegals are criminalized for seeking freedom, justice, and equality, maybe a better life, even here in the United States and the borderlands. They are escaping joblessness, drug cartels, declining economies, crippled by the United States and others, which lowered trade barriers between the US, Canada, and Mexico since 1994. Arizona may not be the new Mississippi, but it has enacted repressive laws that are as unjust and as immoral as the lynch laws of the past. And in Dr. Martin Luther King's words, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So residents in Arizona and elsewhere have a choice to make. To uphold unjust laws, well, deport them. They're illegals. That criminalize whole classes of people, whether they were brought here unfairly or not, and others whose labor we still depend upon. We want to stand with these runaways, these fugitives who are seeking a better life, just as we would stand with the escaped slaves in the North of the 1850s. And despite polls that most Americans support laws that would provide a life pathway to citizenship, no such law exists. And so there's a problem. I think we set up a criminal behavior that that allows us to make people fugitives that can then be deported. I'll stop there. This is from, again, 2010. We actually fought that law successfully, but it became a federal problem, if you will, as recently as in the 2020s, right after the pandemic. And then certainly with the new administration that's been in office for over a year, the idea of making people fugitives from the law allows many things to happen that shouldn't. So looking at our screen, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, are there parallels today? We're going to answer this question or address it. At the time, there were, if you could capture or run them to the subscriber, to the slave. This is one from 1848, and there were others that have higher degrees of rewards based on the people who are being tracked. So African Americans escaping enslavement could be caught, even in the slave-free North, above the Mason-Dixon line, separating the slaveholding South from the North before the Civil War. Delaware, West Virginia, Kentucky, Missouri, these were surveyed by Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon in the 1760s, and thus the Mason-Dixon line, if you hear that, that's the separation. If you cross a certain river into Ohio, you were free. If you crossed the river from Kentucky into Illinois, you were free. If you could get to Pennsylvania, you were free. New York, you were free, until they sent the slave catchers the ice of that day to get you. So then people went north up to Detroit, across the river into Canada. That was a level of freedom that many did not have the capacity to make. So it was enough to get to Pennsylvania or to Massachusetts, very hard to keep going. But if you were in those free areas and you decided to not help the slave catchers, you yourself could be imprisoned or fined or worse. So most citizens felt like they were legally justified and obligated to help return escaped slaves or fugitives. Those who were running away from bad conditions could be, quote unquote, deported from the North and sent to be enslaved in the South. So oftentimes free African Americans were captured and sold into slavery, even if they were innocent. Again, it sounds very familiar. I'm going to capture 10 people who are waiting outside of the Home Depot, and maybe one of them is the person that we're actually trying to get. The other 9, however, we're going to capture them also, and we're going to deport them, even if it turns out the papers were wrong, right? This is, again, what happened to Solomon Northup and many others who were innocent. But more than any other legal decision, like the 1857 Dred Scott decision, which said even if a black man escaped into Ohio or Missouri or somewhere else that didn't have slavery on the books, he had no rights that could be protected. And this is similar to today, where we're trying to, well, we're not trying to, but a certain administration is trying to get rid of the 14th Amendment, which said if you're born free or born in a free zone, you also are free. These are many of the undocumented workers who came here and legally are really Americans, but because they don't have their documents, they could be deported. The Fugitive Slave Act actually led to secession, or a break-off between the slaveholding states and the rest of the Union. It wasn't a war between the states, between Kentucky and Pennsylvania, or Alabama versus New York. No, it was a group of seditionists tried to break away from the United States. And I call it a war of liberation because it was designed to liberate those who were enslaved. It was also designed to unify the country. We call it a civil war, but it was nothing like that. And it was from 1860 to 1865. Many of the border states were freed within the first 2 years. Tennessee was freed. Kentucky was freed. Maryland was freed. Virginia was not, because that was the capital of the slaveholding South. But understand that as soon as those border states were freed, Black folks left the plantation. They became fugitives. And even if the Fugitive Slave Act was still in effect, and President Lincoln said, I'm going to have to compensate every slaveholder if I can find out that your slave has escaped. Yes, he said that. Even if that law was still on the books, Black folks said, never mind, we're leaving tomorrow, right now. And they became millions of people who were basically contraband. They were illegals. But we had to fight a war of liberation and unification in order to solve the slave problem. And why? Most people want to be comfortable in saying, well, it was the white racists who wanted to break away. It was the racists who wanted slavery. But no, many of the northern industrialists also wanted cheap labor. And they didn't mind enslaving people if they could get away with it. They benefited from the cotton industry that was built on slave labor. They benefited from that. And then later, when Black people were freed and they became laborers who had to be paid, they were cheated out of their equitable salaries. So were Americans just racist against Black people? Or were there other reasons besides anti-Black hatred? The hatred was real, but not all anti-Black hatred translated into systemic racism. There were social, political, and economic conditions that played a role. But can you change me to the next slide, please? But there was an economic benefit. Let's start with that first. There was a reward for many of these runaways. A Negro man named George, a Negro slave named Noah, a Negro man named Hemp and Bob, $2,500 reward. If you could return these. This is from 1852, I believe. And there were many, many advertisements like this that were throughout the newspapers of the time. Others were more common, like the $300 reward for a man named Anthony, 26-year-old, or a Negro woman named Margaret, about 22 years old, of a copper color. She's about the height of a man, very stout, weighs about 160 pounds. She has lost one of her upper front teeth, so on and so forth. Can you imagine? She escaped from her home, and Mr. Botts and Mr. Wilfley are willing to pay $300 to capture her and bring her back. And if you were in the North or out of these slave states, there was an incentive in which you could do this without being, morally or ethically culpable, because you were just following the law, so-called. Okay, let's see the next slide, if you could. So here's a diagram of a stampede in which several enslaved people struck out and liberated themselves. They stole themselves for freedom, but they were captured again. They called it a stampede because there was more than one, and they all left together trying to get to Illinois. Again, Missouri was a territory. It was not slave owning. It was going to be fought for, and if it was admitted to the United States as a free state, then the South would be upset. If it was admitted as a slaveholding state, then the North would be upset. And there were many, many bloody battles fought. So let's look at this in terms of the history, the culture, the context, and the biography or the geography of the U.S. These were former colonies that did not get along. They were not so united as previously thought. Just because they were controlled by privileged white men, there were many, many conflicts and contradictions. And so the idea of having conquest and genocidal policy against indigenous nations was tried against many of the other groups that came, who were migrants, who were blacks, who were Mexicans, etc. But none so, none so structured as the genocidal war against indigenous nations that went on for more than 100 years. I think we tend to forget that. Even if we have settled after the Revolutionary War is over, we're still at war with many indigenous nations for another 100 years. So it was policy and practice of the United States to institutionalize war. And so it's not unusual now to see that we have a Department of War, because that's what it was before the 1900s. We were continually at war against indigenous peoples. So there are many, many conflicts, contradictions, and antipathy, anger between the northern industrialists and the southern planters. They wanted to control the product, and part of the product was Negro labor. So there was an incentive for the northerners to return fugitives to the South. And there was a congressional and legislative conflict and contradictions also within the Constitution, which enshrined slavery, which talked about subduing Indian nations, which did not provide justice or the franchise to women. We had a 1787 Bill of Rights that did little to resolve the political economic conflicts. And again, there were many changes that happened in the law after the Civil War, the War of Liberation and Unification, but these were not enough. Let's have the last slide, if you could. Okay, so there were a series of presidents, starting with Jackson, who said, I don't care. I have the personal power and privilege to force Indians to move from Georgia and Alabama over to Oklahoma and west. And he did that. And he took their lands. President Buchanan, Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, all of these were very, I would say, weak presidents in some ways, in the sense that they really didn't do the job of trying to unify the nation. Instead, they sold out basically to moneyed interests. And they called themselves the know-nothings, which meant that they didn't really care about the federal policy. They knew nothing about that. But they knew that this was a white man's nation, and it should be put together in order to help white men do better. So there are many populist movements that built on this white rage against Black people, and the disenfranchisement of free Black men and women was very real, even in the North. So many people, again, escaped further north into Canada and set up strong, vibrant communities. But they never forgot about this battle for abolition. There were popular cultural advances. Many Black spokespersons like Frederick Douglass and many of the escaped slaves who became businessmen and women, entrepreneurs, labor competitors who came out of the South, who enriched the North, but also enraged the Southern planters to demand control over Congress and the judicial branch. Why do I say all this? Because the history shows that this conflict is nothing new, that there was always an open conflict between those who were landed property owners and those who were the laborers. And even though it was better to have cheap labor, the North was being held back by the political power that came from the South because of all of the cotton money, the slave money. So this 1850s conflict was not put to rest because of the Fugitive Slave Act, just as the current laws about immigration really will not put to rest the problems we might have. We do need a judicial constitutional change. We do need congressional action, and we do need an executive branch that has found a pathway for all the workers who have found their way to the United States, just as we needed 4 million Black people to be adopted and integrated into society. I don't mean integrated in the way it's usually meant, but I meant they'll get citizenship rights. And if someone's been here for a number of years and they want to be a citizen, there should be a pathway. Again, that's a connection between being a fugitive as a slave and a fugitive as a migrant. So increased legal protections, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are all on the book. They did help African Americans. They did help all citizens, perhaps not as much for women or Native Americans and non-Anglo immigrants, Asians, Chinese, and Mexicans, etc. It didn't really help them, even though the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment did provide for citizenship rights and illegal actions that could be taken. But there are many lessons from earlier in this century and going all the way back to the 1850s that could help guide us in the 2020s. And I think I'll just have to end there after about 20 minutes of this. This may be the end of this great experiment that we've talked about. A great experiment that said, should we indeed become a nation for all people? Or should we just tighten up the boundaries and say it's really been clear that we're only interested in how white Americans fare, and if everybody else will just get in line, then things will be all right. I've actually heard that. And again, the people who say it are not necessarily racist, but they're just simply saying there should be one standard for what it means to be an American, and the standard comes out of Europe rather than Africa or the Native American lands or Mexico or other parts of Canada, etc. Now, you and I might say that's a little too narrow-minded, and yes, I would call it racist, Dr. Guthrie, but I want you to understand part of the problem is it was a great experiment for many people, but for us, it wasn't an experiment. It was, we want our rights and we are deserving of them because we did build this country and we continue to build it. And many people can say the same thing as immigrant laborers who come from Haiti and Mexico and Canada and even, yes, South Africa to the United States looking for a better life. They deserve a pathway rather than a law that will criminalize them. So I'll end that now so we can open up for discussion and questions with Ms. Kara and Reverend Bernadine. I hope we covered some of the terrain, but please, let's drill down a little bit more if we can. All right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Guthrie. And before we dive into our questions, I just want to remind anyone who's watching tonight that if you have questions, you can also share them in the comments on Facebook or on YouTube with the streaming of this, and we will gladly tackle those and start to answer those. Before we started tonight, I was thinking about the quote, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes." And it certainly seems that we are living in the rhyme. So tonight, a lot of our conversation is going to focus on that rhyme and why perhaps some communities recognize the recurring melody more than others, and how we can navigate that rhyme critically, compassionately, and thoughtfully in our current society. So let's start with the question that you asked at the end of your presentation. What lessons from the 2010s and the 1850s can help guide us in the 2020s?
All right. Well, I'll just start again that in the 2010s, we had an opportunity to put together a legal framework for citizenship. And in Arizona, again, I saw it as a test case. Many of the business people said, no, you can't kick out all of our workers. Who's going to pick fruit in 110-degree heat? Who's going to be on the rooftops in 110-degree heat doing roofing in Arizona? Who's going to do those construction jobs that the union has outbid? And so the answer isn't, well, they can't stay unless they become union members, because the union closed their ranks even against American-born laborers. And you couldn't, again, just continue to treat them like slaves or slave labor, because they deserve a living wage. So the business community said, well, we do know this: do not deport our workers, do not raid them, and get rid of them, because that would be the collapse of the Arizona economy. And they pretty much won that battle. It's like there was a unification between progressive left and conservative business people. And so I think their compromise was that let's have a set of legal obligations towards our workers, that there will be a pathway to citizenship. And that mollified the unions for a while, although they were saying we're still not going to take them as laborers because that's going to depress our salaries for our other workers. So we never really got over the economic part, but it's kind of interesting that the contradiction was that it wasn't the law, it wasn't the morality, it was the dollars and cents that changed many people's minds. So that's one lesson I say. Reverend Lewis, what do you think?
No, and I think at the beginning of our show this evening, I mentioned how there's a fine line between morality and ethics, what's ethical, and legality.
Yeah.
And this, makes for a scary situation, because I do know that we as a people, we stand on the morality, what is right, what is human.
Yeah.
But then we have these laws that just, for lack of a better way to put it, it just shoots it down.
Yeah.
I do want to free my soul on the fact that, and maybe I shouldn't, but like I said, I always like to say we come here to educate, enlighten, and inform. That this all came 1850 on the platform of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And I know your answer, but I just want us to put it out there as the LBE Project to let our listeners know. Speak to us. Historically, African Americans were Republicans.
Yep.
And so if you could just kind of give us a little quick lesson on that will also just help bring, context to where we are now, as we're kind of looking back at the 1850.
Oh, no, I love what you say, Reverend, because we would tend to see things in a concrete, static way. Republicans were always this way. Democrats were always that way. Where actually it was the Whig party that fractured, and you got Republicans and Democrats out of both of those. The Republicans were anti-slavery. That was my man, Mr. Lincoln, who was no he was no paragon of virtue, because he said, I will unite the country, but I have to get rid of you blacks. He actually said that. Colonize them. We'll send you to Liberia and Sierra Leone. We'll send you to Haiti. We'll send you, but you can't stay here. And he was very clear about that. He never, ever changed from that. If he had lived, he would not have given the franchise to black people. He would not have gone for the vote for anybody else, or even the 13th or 14th, 15th Amendments. So our quest, if you will, as difficult as today is, in the 1850s, that created an opportunity. The schism between white elites created an opportunity for us. And we very quickly went towards the Republicans, not because we were, enamored with Lincoln, but because that was the party that did want to fight against slavery. So that became our friends. For Native Americans, it was very hard for them because they joined the wrong side. They thought the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And the Confederacy was fighting against the United States. So therefore, the many Indians aligned with the Confederacy. Well, they lost that war, and they had to give up their slaves. That was bitter, because many of their slaves were actually Native Americans too. What can we say? So again, the contradiction is what I want to arise out of this. Just because things are so bad right now doesn't mean that we can't benefit from the lessons. And it's not just looking at history through, rose-colored lenses, Dr. Guthrie, and saying, well, some good came out of that. What are you talking about? What happened was we became very, very politically astute. We joined the Republicans. We went into the military. We fought against our brothers and sisters in the Native American lands, not because we hated them, but because, hey, the U.S. is on my side right now. I've got to squash you. I've got to take you and put you on the reservation. Very painful. Yeah. On the other hand, once we proved that patriotism, we thought, well, then we get to be citizens. Didn't quite work that way. And so I'll wrap up by saying the moral and ethical foundation is what has guided us, not the legality. We didn't do it just because it was legal. We thought morally and ethically slavery was bad. We don't want to squash Indian sovereignty. But on the other hand, if you have slaves, we're coming for you. So, wow. Yeah. And in 2010 and 2020, there's a similar split. MAGA is not a political party. It is not. The GOP is a political party. And so just because I'm Republican doesn't mean I'm MAGA. I've said this to my brothers and sisters in the military all the time. I can still be a Republican and not be MAGA. I can still keep my brain and not give everything in my heart and soul to that man because he is not a political party. He's not a political leader. He's a faith leader. And he wants to build trust around anger and hatred of other people. Politicians have done this before, but that doesn't make him a good politician. Right. And I don't even think he's an effective political leader. I think he's a faith leader. He's a very good faith leader in terms of building up his following. The Church of Trump is really MAGA. But as you know, churches are not political parties either. Oh, we're getting in trouble now. But I just thought I'd put that in there because many people tend to think if you're a certain political party, you are going to be a Christian and the Christian's going to do what MAGA wants you to do. Well, there are a lot of Christians who don't want to do that. Yeah. I've tried to say too many things at once, Ms. Kara. And so pull me back if I go too far. But that's the terrain.
Well, I think it's all good. And this is the conversation that we need to be having in this moment. So I'm grateful to both of you for opening us up with that. One of the things that stands out to me in just the comparison between the Fugitive Slave Act and what we're seeing now is, and you touched on this a bit in your presentation, Dr. Guthrie, the northern states that resisted enforcement of the act through what was called personal liberty laws. And it makes me remember a interview I just saw recently from Jelani Cobb, who is a dean, I forget at what university, but he was he was speaking about the fugitive slave laws, and he discussed cities like Boston rebelling against, or at least resisting those laws, not necessarily because of shared views of the evils of slavery, but because of not wanting to see their neighbors displaced. And he states during that lecture, in a democracy, the fundamental civil unit is neighbor. So I'm curious on, we've touched a little bit now on that line between what's constitutional, what's legal, and what's moral or what's ethical. Where and how do we draw that line, especially as we think about the history that we're discussing, but also in light of what we're facing now?
Wow. Well, I would say, we are a legal-minded populace, even as neighbors, was like, well, you're okay if you uphold that fence that we share. But as soon as you come onto my property, I have the legal right to blah, 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 blah. I'm like, well, what happened to being neighborly? Now, I just happened to, my dog went over there by accident. I'm sorry. So we are very legally minded when it serves our interests. But on the other hand, I do think, by and large, we want to be morally and ethically bound so that our neighbors is the smallest political unit that we have. And we've said this before. If I could have a beer with him or sit down and have a cup of tea, maybe we can see eye to eye. I know that's what Coral does all the time, Coral Evans. She says, I can talk to anybody. She says, I may not agree, and I'll tell you I don't agree, but I can talk to anybody. And that's a real superpower that she does have. Mm-hmm. And so many of us, if we can get to the moral and ethical part, I think it's okay. But we want to say, but I'm right because of the law. And that really ain't it. By then, it's too late. And I would just have to say from our experience as Africans boarded into slave ships and coming down here, touching on the ground, it was quote unquote legal for us because we were captured products of war on the African continent. We were then properties of the Royal Dutch Slaving Company, and then we were property of whatever. And so legally, we were property. And many people have written about this. Whiteness as property was the number one law. Blackness as property was number two, and then Native Americans, etc. And I say all that to say, many of the things that were done to us were perfectly legal. And for us then to turn around and say, well, the law will set us free. Well, I think you'd have to be, deranged actually to think that was actually a good thing. And so I think we've been hoodwinked and bamboozled into thinking of the Constitution for us, but it never was. 13th and 14th Amendment became law because of our experience, but never was set up for us. It was designed to help poor whites and others who had been disfranchised unfairly. And that's how they sold it. Yeah, we'll let the Negroes free, but you'll get the free schooling as well, or women will get franchised in another 100 years and Native Americans after that. But this is the template. What we're going to do with these Negroes will be an experiment. And so I'll pull back and say that experiment was never designed for our benefit. It was designed for everybody else to believe in a system that was designed to keep them oppressed. And that's a horrible thing to say because we love to think of democracy starting with all men are created equal, when Thomas Jefferson knew it wasn't so. He didn't believe it in his heart, and he wrote it down and then said, God, I'm sorry, but I've sinned and I know it. So again, I'll stop there and say I'll go back to what Reverend Bernardine was talking about. Morally and ethically, we are guided by a greater calling. And the minute we begin to say men will free us because of the laws, that's when we get into trouble. Although it's nice to have a law on your side, I actually don't believe it. Sorry about that.
No, and and that's why I go back to what I said earlier. We do not have to believe it. You can know it. Uh-huh. We have a fact. This is a fact. We are living it. We have lived it.
Yeah.
And we're still living it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And and that's why I'm always so excited to be able to come and share this space and have what I like to call courageous conversations. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because and I think I need to put it out there that this is not about, what is it called, beating a dead horse.
Yeah, right.
Why do they keep talking about this topic? Uh-huh. And because the topic is still very much alive and well. Uh-huh. And and we need to talk about it because now it is not just us as people of African descent. And I think one of our missions is, we never want anyone to say that we did not come to speak this truth, to reveal this truth. Yeah. I do, please, Baby Queen, just two things.
Yeah.
You know, and I mentioned it before we came on air, and I want our viewers to really take this in, because not only, as you mentioned, Brother Doctor, about this being we're a very litigious
Yeah.
society,
Uh-huh.
but we're also very money motivated.
Yeah.
And that's why we're a litigious society, right? Because you
Yeah.
can gain from this financially. You can
Yeah.
benefit.
Yeah.
That $2,500 reward, and I don't know if
Yeah.
Baby Queen can bring it back up, because I want our viewers to know the reality, and I'm going to get it back up here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That $2,500 reward. So, you know, the business side of me, I'm always this money, what it was back then and what it is now.
Mm-hmm.
That $2,500 in 1850
Yeah.
today, right in this very moment, is worth $103,885.26.
Whoa.
So do not let
Yeah.
anyone tell us that we are not valuable.
That's right.
I
Yeah.
mean, not only our bodies, but
Yeah.
our intellect and but that's amazing.
Yeah.
And I mentioned before we went live the $1,000 fine.
Uh-huh.
What did I say that? Oh,
Well, 4,000. Yeah.
$38,750.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I say that because we as a people have got to begin to act in the knowledge of our value,
Mm-hmm.
and to really really think about, I'm beyond protests, and I may be getting a bit off topic, but I think it's all related.
Yeah.
I think our protest needs to be about dollars.
Uh-huh.
And Robert Reich, I love him. He spent some time in the College of Business at NAU, and
Yeah.
he's finally saying, we've got to stop supporting all of these corporations. So right now it's stop supporting the corporations that support ICE.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And so when I think about how our fight for our liberation, our leaving the plantations, how that put a dent in the business of
Mm-hmm.
enslavement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If that's one message that I would like our viewers, particularly our European American brothers and sisters and others, to begin to think about.
No, it's good. It's
Just
really good.
piggybacking on that a little bit. I almost called you Mama.
Yeah.
Reverend
You do
Doctor.
it. It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just piggybacking off of that and the financial incentives of not only slavery, but also slave catching and even the original Emancipation Act in, I believe, New York, was it not? Where they compensated the act was the compensation of former slave owners for the loss of their property. And we see it in the comments here from one of our viewers noting the parallel to the $50,000 ICE signing bonus that was being issued. And just looking at the parallels of that incentivization and the monetizing of enforcement, what cautions does that give us about the current monetization of immigration enforcement or community informing? Like, at what point do we get the message that this is asking us to sell our souls in exchange for the freedom and the humanity of our neighbors and our relatives?
Wow.
Mm.
Yeah. Thank you, Miss Jewel. I remember her.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. It's true. A lot of my friends who are, ex-military, they say, well, we don't have any other jobs. So, we want to do a good job. We want to catch the criminals, etc. And if it just so happens that we also capture innocent people, you'll be let go. And I said, well, you're probably one of the more reasonable people who's trying to explain the the rationale. But I think, you might be the 1% or the 10%, but the other 9, they don't care. They just see the $50,000 and they're going to do whatever the hell it means to get that job done. And there'll be good soldiers in that regard. And so I said, you want to use a soldierly analogy, that they have skills and therefore they should be the ones who are trained properly in how to conduct themselves on raids. I said, I have no problem with that, but that's not what's happening. They're being told, take the money, sit down, shut up. If that means somebody else gets injured, then so much on them. And if they resist you, yes, you'll be backed up if you kill them. And so I was trying to explain to him, I said, that isn't really the rationale that you're trying to explain to me in the mindset of someone who takes a $50,000 signing bonus. They're doing it because they just want the money and they'll do anything for it. And as Americans, we have taken the guardrails off in terms of what is morally and ethically acceptable. Would you do it for 50,000? No, I would not. How about 100,000? No, I would not. How about 1 million? There's a price there. And it seems that a lot of the people who are these so-called agents are willing to pay that price. I'm not trying to say that they're incipient racists, et cetera, but I think the economic insistence makes them turn, I won't say a blind eye, but I'm saying they'll make them not see the problems with just taking the money.
Yeah.
Right? Am I wrong? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And not to mention, let's put it all out there.
Yeah.
The student debt forgiveness is tied into this position as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, when you think if you have a, 70, 80, $100,000 in student debt, and that can be forgiven, I think, with 3 or 4 months of, or 6 months of, service.
Yeah.
So a lot of motivation there.
No, you're right. And I think one other thing I'll say is that we have already seen in Arizona that prisons for profit, and in Tennessee, prisons for profit, et cetera, are really power houses for making economic drivers in areas that really don't have any jobs. And the people who go into them, they're not thinking, I want to be like Hitler or somebody else. They're thinking, this is a good paying job. I can go 9 to 5. They're not thinking about how they are being part of the concentration camp or anything like that. And so it begins to numb the sense of moral and ethical work. It's like, well, you're a prison guard or whatever. And the system itself might be people who don't deserve to be there. These are not all Mandelas and, other people who are political prisoners. No, I'm not saying that. But they have been criminalized in ways that you could be criminalized, but for the, but for the grace of God.
There go I.
Yeah.
There go I.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think too, Dr. Guthrie, about the slide where you talked about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments following the war and following this act, which really makes me question what it takes for constitutional changes like this to occur, and why they take so long, and why they always seem to follow this sort of crisis.
Yeah.
Do you think that major expansions or recognition of equitable rights has to require crisis in our democracy? Or
Yeah.
could we find a way to ease our path to equity?
Yeah.
And if there is an easier path,
Mhm.
why don't we ever choose it?
Yeah.
Mm.
I used to think there was a couple of oases, Miss Kara, that allowed us to show the best that America had to offer. You know, right after the Declaration was signed, and Black people got to fight in the Revolutionary War. Right after the Revolutionary War is over, and they tried to create a constitution that was obviously not going to work, so they put in the Bill of Rights. You know, right after the Civil War, and they put in the 13th and 14th Amendment, and women, you can wait; it'll happen for you too. And wow. It's too bad it was just, like 7 years. But I was reading a book by Carol Anderson. It's called White Rage.
Yep.
And she said, you know what? Those weren't oases, Dr. Guthrie. The crises became even hotter. And the only reason you got the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment was because Lincoln was killed, and his replacement, Andrew Johnson, was a stone racist segregationist. And if that had not happened, then nobody would have had the political will to pass the 13th, 14th, or 15th Amendment. And even then, they really didn't want it to happen for Black people's freedom. They wanted to punish those people who part of Andrew Johnson's party and the former Confederates for killing more than 400,000 people. They wanted to punish them. So you can't really promote somebody through punishment. I mean, that's the American way, right? Put out your hands and we'll wrap your knuckles.
Yep.
We are a disciplined and punished society. But the idea of by grace and by God and by spiritual means, we become whole and healed. That's a foreign concept. And Dr. Anderson says, I want you to see this because white rage has been irrational. It has been spontaneous. And it has been constant. And so we've had this illusion that the Constitution was designed to protect us and it ultimately become enforceable and amendable. Mm-hmm. And she was saying, no, it's been designed to keep us spinning our wheels for processes that were not designed to deliver justice. Because if we needed justice, then we would have had 100 years of building Black communities after the so-called Civil War. Instead, we got, 7 years? And then we did 1964, 65, another 7 years. Mm-hmm. And then you could say Obama. Well, no, Obama didn't do anything radical at all. He really didn't. He just said, I'm going to keep the plane together until the next person comes. And people are like, well, you're not doing it. He says, well, that's not why I'm here. Bless his heart. He was not really there to upset the apple cart. He was a deporter in chief. He was the drone king. He went and spent millions of dollars killing an 80-year-old man named Osama bin Laden, who really was not a force at all. I know people say that that's heresy, but he was not an active force after he retired to the hills of Pakistan. That's the facts. Yeah. But we wanted to punish him, and he became a great symbol. And so our man, the man of African descent, but not a Black president, went after him, and he did that. And I don't hold it against him because he saw himself, like Lincoln, of pulling together the country on whatever means were necessary. And I'll wrap this up by saying there's something about white aggrievement or white rage that has never really gone away. I mean, I think there's smaller numbers of people who are enraged. There really are. Mm-hmm. But it's like South Africa at the end of their apartheid era. Very, very small number of people who were trying to control the whole country, and they were angry. And they killed people. They killed anybody to the left of Mandela for 2-3 years before he became president. And I think that is a horrible template to have to raise in this era, because that means that more people who are to the left of us will be, because we're the reasonable ones, will be, pilloried and killed. Anyway, I'll stop before I go off the deep end in there, but I just wanted to say the experiment was always designed to see how long they could put off real justice for people who have been historically oppressed. And that means women, that means gays, that means Indians, that means poor whites, that means, oh yeah, Black people.
Yeah.
But we become the litmus for that, which is, it was never designed to work for you, Reverend Lewis. So I don't know why you're angry now. Why are you angry? Why are you still angry? Shoot, you're from Savannah. You should know. You Gullah Geechee folks deserve your 40 acres and 200 mules. I don't know.
Hey, and you know what? I'm very humbled as I sit here.
Yeah.
One of the few who got the 40 acres and mules by way of Miss Katie Brown. And
okay.
And not to mention that the 40 acres and a mule agreement was made right here in Savannah, Georgia.
Yes. Amen. See?
So, you know, and it amazes me that you know, I should see more wealthy people of African descent here.
Yeah.
And so it just goes to show how many promises have been made, promises unkept.
Yes.
And that's a whole nother community dialogue within itself. But I, you know, when we talk about this experiment, and this was a great experiment, but I again, we cannot, we have to put it out there for the people. This was an experiment within an experiment, because America is an experiment.
Yes.
And so, you know, I'm not sure if this experiment derailed that one, but you know, would you care to tackle that thought?
Wow. Well, here's the thing, and I'll step back and let Kara say more. But we are in the wake, right, of mourning Reverend Jesse Jackson, and whether you liked him or not liked him, there was a moment where he said, "You know what? Red, yellow, green, or white, we are precious in God's sight." And what he meant was this rainbow of people is really the natural state of human beings. We are all diverse and different, and we're stronger that way. And I thought, again, for the moment, the door that opened under the Rainbow Coalition and his campaign, again, as difficult and as incomplete as it was still right on the mark in saying we are actually stronger together when we fight through our differences and say, I disagree with you, but I'm going to work with you because you will benefit from this as well. And that's the morally, ethically good thing to do. That's what the good Jackson was. He stood for. The other one, he tried to use the dollars, like you were trying to say. I'm going to get the dollars from the corporations to give it to you people, and scholarships and kickbacks. And he caught hell for that because they said, well, you also were enriching yourself. And he said, well, you know, this is how business is done in America. And we cannot disassociate that from the moral and ethical thing of, is it right to give advertisement to Black newspapers? Yes. Is it right to get scholarships to people who are the sons and daughters, the descendants of emancipation? Yes. Is it right to, you know, on and on and on. And by the time he was done, he had a segmented rainbow for how are you going to deal with everybody. And again, he was an imperfect human being. You know, he wasn't a saint. And he knew that he had to use himself as the battering ram and the brand for what he stood for. And that's you know, the good thing and the bad thing. I would never want to be in his shoes where he basically put himself first. Because once I got through the door, everybody's coming with me. We don't have people like that anymore. Not even Mr. Obama and Michelle. They couldn't do what he tried to do. And I guess Obama knew that, you know. But the days when you had a Jesse Jackson, a Martin Luther King, a Malcolm X, you know, a Rosa Parks, etc., those days are pretty much evaporated. It's not one person that you go to and say, I'm gonna give it all to you, and the rest of you all can shut up and be quiet. Jackson opened the door and changed the rules so that there could be a Reverend Lewis and a Counselor House and many others who are now going to play the roles that Jesse would have played. And so I'll say that to say this grand experiment is designed to be like that house that's on fire. that we're trying to escape from. But before we jump out the window with the baby, we're trying to rescue as many people as possible. I don't think we can save the house that's burning. I think we need to save ourselves. And Jackson knew that. So again, that's not to be negative. That's to say we're on the precipice of something that's very different today compared to next year. And time will tell whether or not it comes out in our favor. But I do think prophecy is definitive, that the worst has not been visited just yet. So hold on to your ethics and your morals.
Yes.
What do you say, Counselor House?
This conversation feels so important right now. And I think especially with, we're seeing a lot of conversations in Flagstaff, across Arizona, across the nation, that are talking about what we need to do to both survive these times and really learn the lessons that the past should have taught us or can still teach us before it's too late. Just thinking about the various rhymes that we see with the Fugitive Slave Act, I think about how this law required citizens, even in free states, to assist in returning escaped enslaved people, for that level of complicity with a federal order. The law allowed alleged fugitives to be captured with minimal due process. And in the process, many free Black Americans were sometimes kidnapped and sold into slavery because of the economic benefits of doing so. We talked about, on your fourth slide, the presidents who either undermined or selectively extended federal authority. We talk about the fact that this act was legal, even though many believed it was immoral. And so we had that conflict between morality and legality. And we saw the tensions that existed through the law to create a lot of tension between federal authority and local governance. We saw the deputization of ordinary citizens to serve in those roles and challenge, again, that moral standing of what's right and how do we exist with our neighbors versus viewing our neighbors as our enemies. It was an act that functioned with a racial hierarchy that denied Black Americans equal protection. At the same time as this law was being put into effect, we saw the establishment of other laws when it came to health and work that made it illegal to be unemployed at a time when Black people could not get jobs, who saw it as a form of insanity to want freedom. And so there was the institutionalization of Black people who escaped. So exchanging one form of slavery for another. And just looking at what we're seeing now, all of those parallels and all of that I just outlined in those comparisons, very bleak, not exactly the most joyful parallels. But at the same time, I think it's also an important window to be able to look at into our past to see how harmful and damaging those sorts of rules and laws and processes were to us as a nation, not only to Black people or Indigenous people or Hispanic and Latine people, but the entire nation, how long it took us to recover from that in any tangible or meaningful ways. And looking at where we're at now, I think it gives us a very good indication of what we will face if we don't correct course. And so I think my last question, or last just opening it up to both of you, is what lesson do we have to take away from this conversation tonight? What can people not walk away from this conversation without having either learned or accepted or open their minds to for where we need to go as a community and as a nation?
Wow. What lessons? Well, let me say, and then I'll let the Reverend have the last word. The main lesson is, again, it's not that you want to go back and say, let me correct the history so that once you know the history, you're going to do right. I think many people don't know the history, and we certainly want them to get that from today. The history does need a corrective, but it's not enough. It's not enough just to know the history has been told wrong and that people are doing wrong based on a misreading of the past. I think the second lesson that connects to that is you have a chance to do what is right morally and ethically, whether you know the history or not. It's what you think morally and ethically you're called upon to do. And for me, I think the first thing is to have grace towards other people that you may agree or disagree with. Have grace towards them because they may be operating under a misshapen understanding of their calling. And I think that we all have our brothers and sisters' coattails that we need to pull. And a neighborly thing is, I'll have grace toward you if you will break bread, have a beer, or sit down, have some tea, and pull the wool. And let's talk about this rather than just going off and saying, you're right, I'm wrong, or vice versa. And that they're just trying to do a job that they're told to do. So get back and let them do it. The lesson is the history may have been told to you wrongly. You're acting on the mistaken understanding. And then because you are, I'm going to give you grace so that we can correct this together. Those are two things I would say. Yeah. So what would you say, Reverend?
No, I say amen, amen, and amun. And to that, when we talk about grace, we first have to extend grace to ourselves. And before we can extend grace to others.
Yeah.
And before I can extend grace to myself, I had to sit with both the truth and the lies of who I was told I was and who I am. And no matter what, we all must know that we are all fearfully and wondrously made in and after the image of our Creator. And because we know that, then that should humble us to be able to extend grace beyond ourselves and to others. And so when I look at this bitter, twisted history, his story, our story is one of rising up out of the flames of hatred, of bitterness, of neglect. And we indeed are a wondrous people. And I'm reminded of Dr. Cornel West when he and I call him my father because my queen mother has an affection for him that so. But you know, he said that it's a miracle that when European Americans are able to leave our presence and they have left without us slapping them upside their heads. And but that is the grace, right? That's the mercy. That's the love. And I'm saying all of that to say that I know that there's a significant amount of our European American brothers and sisters and others who think that if we were just to give them one real chance, because we still haven't had a real chance,
Nope.
a full opportunity to be whatever this definition of American is to them.
Yeah.
That we're not seeking retaliation.
No.
Nope. You know, a lot of us, we don't want what they have. We want our own. We have the gifts and abilities and talents to create beyond what their concept of wealth or intellect or anything. We're above that and beyond that, but with humility. And just like we have had to for some of our generations had to learn from them, but we really were teaching them. You know, they're going to have to find their grace and mercy and humility. And until that happens, we have to maintain our grace, mercy, and humility.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah.
Very good. Whew.
It ain't easy.
No, it ain't easy.
And we far from this, you know, being over. And so, you know, when we talk about how are we going to get through this, you know, I'm reminded of that Negro spiritual, how I got over.
Yeah.
So we do get over, but we've got to maintain it with humility, grace, and mercy.
Well said. Well said. Okay.
Well, thank you both so much for engaging in this conversation. We are hearing from community members in the chat, just sharing how impactful this conversation was, how enlightening it was, the opportunity to learn. I got to give a shout out to Dr. Tracy Moore, who noted how much she misses her Black family on the mountain. We miss you too, Dr. Moore. But among all the comments, just the reflection that I think conversations like this allow us to have. And Dr. Lewis, I believe it was you who made reference to this bitter earth. And as you were talking, I was looking up the lyrics to the song, and just the last verse of that song, I think, is a beautiful thing for us to leave the audience with. And it says, this bitter earth can be so cold. Today you're young, too soon you're old. But while a voice within me cries, someone may answer my call, and this bitter earth may not be so bitter after all.
After all. Yes. Wow. Okay.
That is the message of the rhyme, I think, of this conversation. That's the melody that we are choosing to follow in this conversation. Is this world is hard. We've had many, many hard lessons to learn. We have tilled this earth every way that you can imagine, and sown it with the blood of our ancestors and the tears of our kindred and the spirits of our relatives.
Yes.
And yet, doing that, we have literally sown ourselves into this earth in a way that makes it inextractable from our history, our stories, and our endurance. And so the amount of strength that we've been able to put into this earth means that we shall overcome, because we have constantly been overcoming. And that is the message that I give to everyone who is joining us tonight, whether you are of the African diaspora or Indigenous relative who's watching, or a European American relative who has also seen your line grow up alongside of ours, or in different ways. we are all in this together. We need each other, and we can overcome as long as we remember that.
Yep.
So, as we always say with this group, we remind you to care for each other, love each other, support each other, defend each other as necessary. And as always, until next time, we remind you to go in grace.
Amen. Thank you.